small, so Catherine, please forgive me if I missed something here. Catherine B. Thompson is the Executive Director of the Children's Advocacy Center of Parker County, where she has served since December of 22. Previously served as the Director of Patsy's House Children's Advocacy Center in her hometown of Small Falls, during which time she also served on the Board of Directors of Children's Advocacy Centers in Texas. In 2004, Catherine moved to the DFW area and became a member of the Rotary Club of Fort Worth, where she was a board member, club secretary, and chaired international services. In 2007, the club began raising money to address the issue of low adult literacy in Tarrant County. Catherine served on the task force to raise more than $200,000, which helped establish the Tarrant Literacy Coalition, a new nonprofit organization. She was hired as the founding executive director in 2009. That same year, Catherine and fellow Rotarians on the International Service Committee traveled to South Africa and distributed 2,000 books. In 2019, Catherine joined the staff of Center of Hope as Director of Administration and Training and helped coordinate services as the agency moved into its new building and expanded services into Weatherford. Transferred her Rotary membership to Weatherford Club, where she is now a board member and chairs youth service. Catherine is a certified fundraiser who has raised millions of dollars for nonprofit organizations through capital campaigns and annual giving programs, and has presented fundraising workshops at conferences across the U.S. She and her husband live in Annetta and have 3 adult children and 3 grandchildren. They attend High Ridge Church. Thank you very much, Catherine. We appreciate you being here.
Well, I didn't realize this was going to be recorded. And I can't see you all over there. So thank you for having me, though. It's nice to get to come and talk to any group about the Children's Advocacy Center. So that's really near and dear to my heart, but also to come and speak to Rotarians is especially special to me, being a Rotarian. So I am going to talk to you a little bit today about the Children's Advocacy Center of Parker County. This is the second time I've worked in a Children's Advocacy Center. I think was maybe mentioned. I helped start the Children's Advocacy Center in Wichita Falls many years ago, and thought that I would not be coming back to this work. But almost 2 years ago, when they reached out to me and asked me about helping at the Children's Advocacy Center here in Parker County. I really just couldn't say no. I am going to share with you some information today that might be hard to hear. You mentioned what your wife did, and it's not easy information. What we do at the Children's Advocacy Center, but it's very important that people in the community understand what's happening here in our community and what you can do to help these children and families. So the average person works about 240 days a year in a typical year. And that number 240 is significant to us at the Children's Advocacy Center because that is the number of children we served last year who came into our center during the year to talk about the abuse they had experienced. If you think about that, that means it's one every single day. Every single day, another child came to our center to talk to our staff about the things that were happening to them and had happened to them, the kind of abuse they had experienced. And if I asked you all, each one of you, to pull out a piece of paper and write down, what do you think is the most awful thing somebody could do to a child? I can tell you, I promise you, that what you would write down would not be as bad as what we see at the Children's Advocacy Center on a daily, weekly basis. We see things that are really, truly unspeakable. And the people that are hurting them are people who live and work, do business, go to church with all of us right here in Parker County. It's people who live in your neighborhoods, people whose children and grandchildren go to school with our children and grandchildren and live right here among us. It's not some guy living under a bridge. It's not some person who's trying to entice your child to be on a movie set or a modeling career like we see in the movies. It is people who live right here among us. And for the most part, they look just like all of us right here in this room. Now, the vast majority of cases that we work at the Children's Advocacy Center are children who have been sexually abused by someone who is known and trusted by the family. That's about 80% of the cases that we see. The other 20% are children who have been severely physically abused. And by severely physically abused, I mean children who need medical care. They've been abused badly enough that they need medical care. Or children who are in a home where there is dangerous domestic violence or children who have been exposed to significant drug abuse. We call those drug endangered children. And so that makes up about 20% of the cases that we see. And people always ask me, how does this go on for so long? Why do children not tell? How is it happening? Because we have children who come to our center that have been abused like that for sometimes 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and they have not told anybody. And the reason they don't tell, first and foremost, is because they're threatened by the abuser. They're afraid, they're scared to tell. Sometimes they just think that this is what life is. They don't know that that doesn't happen to other children. They don't realize that every home is not like that, or that everybody doesn't have an uncle or a cousin or an aunt or somebody in their life that abuses them. Sometimes they're really most of the time, they're ashamed, they're embarrassed, they think it's their fault, and they think they're the only one. Some do wait years to tell, and often don't tell until they finally feel safe. They may finally get to a point where they're old enough and big enough that they feel like they can tell. Maybe the abuser leaves the area, leaves the home. Maybe it's been someone who's lived nearby or lived in the home or had contact with them, and that person goes away. And then finally the child thinks that they can tell. Sometimes what happens is a child will begin to get older and bigger, and then they will realize that a younger sibling in the home is going to be the next victim. And so they decide, I'm going to tell because I want to protect my little sister or my little brother. And even though they're very scared and very afraid to tell, they go ahead and speak up. They'll tell a teacher or a trusted adult, and they do that to protect that younger child. So I'm going to tell you 2 examples. Now, I want to tell you, I could stand up here and tell you stories all day long. Remember, one child every single day. I have many, many stories I could tell you, but I'm going to tell you 2 stories, just 2 quick examples of kids that just have come. One is a story from the Metroplex, but it's very similar to stories that we see. And one is a story that we've seen recently. One was a significant physical abuse. There were some kids in our community that were being very, very badly physically abused. And I'm talking about black eyes, lots of bruises, a couple of broken bones, just really, really bad physical abuse. And you might think, how does nobody notice that? How do kids go to school with that kind of injury and nobody noticed? Well, people did notice, but the story that was being told was, these are just rough and tumble kids. These are accident prone kids. These are kids that are playing with each other and knocking each other around. And, you know, that was the story that was being told. The kids all told the same story. The other parent in the house told that story because it was one of the parents in the home. Everybody had the same cover-up story, but it just got worse. And finally, an extended family member who decided that it was not worth it anymore, even though there was a fear of retaliation, a fear of something bad happening. That family member decided, I've got to do something. And that family member happened to have photos of those children without the long sleeve shirts and the long pants that they always wore. And those pictures were awful. And so that family member made a report and submitted those pictures. And when people saw those pictures, it was very, very clear something very bad was happening in that home. So I'm happy to say that the person did step up and made the report, but this was after years of abuse. And those children are safe now, finally. But it took a long time and somebody finally stepping up and saying something. Now, let me tell you another story, and this did not happen at our center, but it's such a story that I know you won't forget it, and I don't want you to forget it. It's a sad, awful story, but I heard it and I haven't forgotten. And it's very similar to some of the stories that we hear and see at our CAC. This story happened to a man who is now, it's a true story, happened to a man who's now a law enforcement officer. And so when he was younger, his parents worked long hours and they took him to a daycare center in a home. A woman who was very beloved. Everybody loved this lady. She kept kids in her home, and she was just one of those kind, wonderful women that, you know, keeps kids in her house, and everybody loved her. And this little boy loved her too, and his parents loved her. They worked long hours. What nobody noticed was that she had an older teenage son. And when he first started going there, that boy was about 18 years old. And as he continued there, the boy grew up to be, grew on and became a young man. And that person was a child sex abuser. He was sexually abusing the boys in her care, violently, viciously, and repeatedly. And he had all those little boys that were going to her home very, very scared, very frightened. And what he was telling them was, if you tell, I'll go to prison, but you'll go to prison with me. And those little boys believed that. They were terrified. They were not going to tell. And it was ongoing, repeated abuse. And even though his parents later said that they noticed that after a short time of going there, his whole personality changed. He had been a fun-loving, laughing, outgoing little boy, and he became much quieter and depressed. And they actually kind of chalked it up to, well, because we're working so much and he's going to this daycare center. But his whole personality changed and the abuse continued. And let me tell you what happened that stopped it. He was so convinced that if he told, he would go to prison, and then he would be in prison with this abuser. And he's just a little boy. I mean, like 7 or 8 years old. But he thought, think how much worse it will be. I'll be in prison, and I'll be in prison with him. And so finally, one year, after this had been going on for 3 or 4 or 5 years, his parents said, we're going to go to Disney World this summer. The happiest place on earth. He figured out that Disney World was in Florida. And so when his family made this trip and made this plan, his little mind realized, if I tell when we get to Florida, I'll still go to prison, but I'll be in a prison in Florida, and he'll be in a prison in Texas. And so when his family arrived at Disney World, he sat his parents down like the first day and said, I need to tell you something. And he finally told. That little boy thought, I'm going to prison, but at least I'll be in prison in Florida, and he'll be in prison in Texas. And that's what brought that whole thing down, and it finally stopped. And when you think about that, and I bet you won't forget it because I never have, we have little kids who come into our center, and they'll tell us things like that. Like a little boy that I met who was blonde-headed and was being abused, and he saved up his money. He was 10 years old, and he went to Walgreens, walked to Walgreens and bought hair dye, and tried to dye his hair black. Of course, he didn't know how to do it. And when his mother was like, what are you doing? He thought if he dyed his hair black, that the person who was sexually abusing him wouldn't recognize him anymore and wouldn't pick him out to abuse him. These are the things that go through kids' minds, and that's the stuff we see at the Children's Advocacy Center. Those are the stories we hear from kids. Now, let me just tell you, our staff reads and sees every single report of child abuse that comes into Parker County every single day. So far, it's been about we've had about 1,100 reports this fiscal year. Every single report. You call in report suspected child abuse, it comes into our office and my staff reviews it. And then we coordinate the response with law enforcement, child protective services, the prosecution, Cook Children's and JPS if the child needs medical care. And we work to make sure that those kids don't fall through the cracks. I have a highly skilled forensic interviewer who's on my staff, and she talks to those children while law enforcement and CPS watch from another room. And then we let them do what they do, which is CPS goes out to get protections for the children, and the law enforcement go out and arrest the bad guys. That's what we want to happen. I also have a family advocate on staff who works with the families, because let me tell you, some of these families split up. Sometimes it's a person in the home. Sometimes it's the dad or the stepdad or grandpa or somebody. And so sometimes these families in a day, in a moment of time, they learn that somebody's got to leave. And we don't want it to be the child. It's got to be the adult who's been doing the abuse, and that person has to leave. And so our family advocate works with them. I also have 2 licensed therapists on staff, an LPC and an LCSW, who are highly trained in trauma care and work with these children to help them overcome the trauma that they've experienced. They put together a treatment plan and they work with the children so that they can overcome what has happened to them. And they can overcome, and they do overcome. They can this, no matter how bad it's been, they can be healed and go on and live a great life. Now, I want to just tell you real quickly, because I said that I would, told Kella that I would. So let me talk to you about the signs and symptoms, because this is Child Abuse Prevention Month, and everybody can help stop child abuse and stop it in its tracks. So let me just share with you a couple of signs and symptoms. If you're wondering, well, how would I know? How would I know if the children in my Sunday school class or the kids that are playing with my grandkids or my own children, how would I know? Let me share some signs and symptoms. Unexplained injuries, especially around the head. People who hurt children often like to knock them upside the head. That is a red flag. Grab marks on the arms. We see kids who have fingerprints on their arms. If a child is in trouble or about to get into something they shouldn't get into, you can move them aside without leaving your fingerprints literally on their hands and bruises. Children who wear long sleeves and long pants, even in the summertime, especially around here, it's hot. You see a child, long pants, long sleeves, somebody's trying to hide something, probably. Burns are a big red flag. Children don't typically get burned unless somebody's inflicting a burn on them. An obvious injury without a reasonable explanation. So if somebody's hurt and the story they tell doesn't make sense to you, then that's a reason to check it out. Parents who severely limit their children's activity or interaction with other people. You know, someone who's kind of got their kids hidden back and don't let them ever talk to anybody or go play with anybody or see other people. That's a little bit of a red flag. Especially children who are especially fearful, particularly if they're fearful around somebody else. I mean, a specific person. So, you know, like if thinking back to the little boy in the Disney World story, if his parents, and I don't want to put blame on them, but if they had ever noticed that he was especially fearful around that teen boy, that would have been a red flag. Inappropriate sexualized behavior or language from kids. If I told you all the numbers of how many children come to our center who have watched pornography or who could show me on my phone where all the good porn sites are, you would be stunned. The phones that these kids have, if people think they have blocks on them, let me assure you, a lot of them don't. And so if a child talks like you think you might hear in a porn site, and if you've never looked at porn site, neither had I, so I came to work here, but let me tell you, they're everywhere. But if a child is talking in graphic language like that, they've either probably seen it on a pornography site or someone's showing it to them intentionally or talking to them like that. We had a case recently where a little girl said something to her mother that caused her head to spin around about 3 times. And it was because someone who was sexually abusing her was talking to her like that. Any physical injuries or pains in the child's genital area. If the child tells you they're hurting there, they don't, something's happened to them there, that's a big red flag. And any sudden change in behavior. Again, remember my story about the little boy with the Disney World. If a child has been normally outgoing and laughing and playing and just seemed like a quote unquote normal child, and then you notice that they suddenly become very, very withdrawn and something's bothering them, they cry, they don't talk, that's a red flag. Basically, anything that makes you feel very uneasy and uncomfortable that really concerns you is something to be concerned about. Now, in Texas, every single adult in Texas is a mandated reporter. That means the law says that you have to make a report if you're worried about a child. You don't have to investigate it. You don't have to interview the child. You don't have to get all the details, but you do have to make a report. And the number is 1-800-252-5400. There are handouts on your tables that have that number on it. If you can't remember it, you can always call the Children's Advocacy Center and we will give you the number. But you can't call us and tell us and say, well, I did report it, because we're not the place you report. We can help you make the report, but the law says you have to make the report. So let me just tell you a couple of quick things before I close. And I said this the other day, if you were at the Parker County Chamber lunch, I'm sorry, you're going to hear me say it again, but there's a couple of things that we always talk about. One is, if you know better, you can do better. Some families, their children end up getting abused because somebody just doesn't know better. And by that, I mean, they let their children stay with somebody, or somebody offers to babysit their kids that their children should not be staying with. If a person who wants to abuse a child is maybe very quick to say, I'll babysit your child for free. Or, I've said this before when I worked at the Children's Advocacy Center back in Wichita Falls, we say it again. If a guy moves in down the street from you or next door and says, I'll babysit your kids and they can even spend the night with me. No, you need to know better. But if you're a young single mom and you're barely getting by and childcare is massively expensive, it takes half your paycheck, and some seemingly nice, wonderful guy says, hey, I don't, I work from home and I don't mind, your kids could come stay with me. I love kids. That sounds pretty enticing to this person who's thinking, but I don't have $800 or $900 a month to pay for childcare. And he seems like such a nice guy. So sometimes the best thing we can do to help families is help put the word out. If you don't know a young woman who tells you that, or a young parent, you need to help them say, no, that's not a good idea. That may seem like a good idea, but it's not. They may simply not know any better than to leave their children with somebody like that. Keep your eyes and ears open. Young people around you that maybe they were raised differently than you were raised. Maybe they just don't know better. And the other thing is, if you see something, say something. Those sound like just jargon, but seriously, if you see something, say something. If you volunteer in an organization, like we mentioned, there's a lady here from the scouting, you volunteer in an organization that's not training its volunteers on how to be safe around children, step up and say, wait, we need to make sure that we don't have adults alone with children. And by that, I mean, not just have a rule that, one adult can be in a room with a bunch of children. You all may have heard that there are times when they think, well, it's okay if it's one adult and several children because the children are there in numbers. No, there are multiple incidences of children being abused by one adult who was with several children at the same time. That adult singles them out one at a time and abuses those children. So be sure that if you're involved in a group, make sure that that group is training people on how to take care of children safely and that they have safety practices in place. And be sure that you protect yourself as well. So in closing, I would just say there's handouts on the table. We have some events going on this month for Child Abuse Prevention Month. There's information about our programs, and we always welcome people come and see our center. If you haven't been to the Children's Advocacy Center, Greg, I know you've been there. Come and see us. We can tell you stories all day long, but you can actually see hands-on how we do our work and what we do there. We always welcome that. Just give us a call. We do have a lot of privacy concerns, so we have to kind of schedule the tours in between what we're doing there. But we'd love to have you all come, or the whole Rotary Club could come and have a meeting there. We would love to have you as well. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. But that's all I have. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.